Hello and welcome to this presentation on the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, subtitled Imagination as Realization of Unified Reality. My interpretation of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner depends upon Coleridge's definition of imagination, which is found in Biographia Literaria. I've highlighted the key sections here, and I won't read through the entire thing because you can see it in front of you, and of course it was part of your reading. The key elements of the definition that I think are relevant to understanding, or at least to my understanding of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, is Coleridge's vision of the imagination as he puts it, a repetition in the finite mind of the eternal act of creation in the infinite I Am. The I Am, of course, being God. And so the way I read this is that for Coleridge, the imagination functions in the same way that creation, let me try this again, that basically when we employ the imagination, we become co-creators of our world of perception with God. In other words, God is the eternal act. God produces creation, which is an eternal act, and we ourselves, in acting upon creation through our imagination and perception, are taking part simultaneously in the creation. So the function of the imagination is to give the kind of formed creation through our perception that God gave it in terms of actual essence or form. I hope you can understand that. Maybe the best way to put it is to say that that God creates and we recreate, so to speak. It is a repetition, right? In other words, the force of, or the perception of God, I think, from Coleridge's point of view, is that God is an artist. He is a creator. He is a maker. When we perceive the universe and we give it the same kinds of dimensions, color, shapes, the organizing principle that makes the universe intelligible to us, we are engaged in the same kind of creation that God engaged in when He created the universe itself. And the other important thing is, in describing the imagination, he says that it struggles to idealize and to unify. This is what we try to do. In fact, in many respects, this is similar to what's often referred to as Gestalt psychology, the idea that the mind works to organize. Its primary focus is to organize experience into a discernible and intelligible whole. He says it is essentially vital, even as all objects, as objects themselves, like a pen or a tree, are essentially fixed and dead. Now, why that's important, of course, is how I'll read the scene with the albatross coming up. But essentially, without the ability without the organizing principle of the imagination, objects have no relationship with each other. They are fixed, okay? They are separate and therefore unintelligible. It's just a random bit of chaos. And they don't have any kind of life to them. They don't have any meaning or any significance. We, through our imagination, are able to organize everything into an intelligent and intelligible whole, and by doing so, to give vitality and meaning to the universe that we perceive. It's important to consider the overall structure of the poem in order to understand exactly what's going on. Obviously, the poem has a story within a story, so there are two structures I'll talk about. There is the poem itself, and as you can see, I have two sets of brackets. There is the poem that takes place in the present. That's where we begin, and that's where we end. and that the events in the present are the mariner meeting and meeting the wedding guest and beginning to tell his story, and then the events that occur after the story is finished, where we get the moral of the story, quote unquote moral, I might add, and of course what we find out about the wedding guest the next morning when he wakes up. So that is that's the present frame of the poem. But within that frame, of course, is the smaller frame of the mariner's tale, and that's the majority of the poem. But the tale itself, if we're going to understand its meaning and significance, we have to understand it within the context of the telling of the tale. So both of these structures work together. And so in order to make sense of the overall poem, we have to account not just for the events of the tale, which is the fun part, but also to take into account or to understand the significance of the tale in the present circumstances, which is the discourse between the mariner and the wedding guest. Now, within the tale, we saw this structure last week when we talked a little bit about the visionary romantic lyric, and we're going to see this structure a lot more when we look at Keats's odes, because they follow very close to the same structure, and that is a rising and then a falling away. I have this triangular structure here. It's not quite the same kind of structure as we'll see with the odes, but I'm going to divide the realm here of the real and then the unreal. With Keats, we'll see in his odes it's the real and the ideal, which is also what we saw when we dealt with ode Intimations of Immortality. The real is where we begin and where we end. It begins in a state of union with the mariner as a representative of the town. He is an integral part of that town. He is part of that union. When he goes off to sea, he becomes separated from the communal aspects, and so he is much more alone. Nevertheless, he's still part of nature. He's still part of the overall universe, part of creation, perhaps, to harken back to Coleridge's definition, until he kills the albatross. And that is when we see where he experiences life and death. And I'll talk more about these different moments in subsequent slides. But in this situation here, he becomes separate, he becomes isolated. He is in the world of the unreal, the world that we do not normally experience. His return is a reunion. He is able to return back into the community to reintegrate himself because he has been redeemed. But unlike what's suggested at the end of the poem, the redemption is more of an imaginative redemption than it is a spiritual redemption. If Coleridge's vision of the imagination is that which allows us to perceive the unity of all things, that it is the unifying force of our experience, then that's why it's important to note that what do we see at the beginning of the story? We see a man who's going to a wedding as a guest. And what is a wedding? It is a communal celebration. And again, notice I'm playing off of the word community. It is a community celebration, it is a communal celebration, but I'm emphasizing this idea of unity. So the wedding guest is a member of a community. The mariner, who kind of stands outside of that community, he's both a member and not a member because of his experience. Remember, we talked about in the structure of Ode Intimations of Immortality that we have, and the poet begins as A, then moves to B, then comes back down to A, back to reality, but it's A prime because he has changed. The events of the tale change the mariner, so he is part of the human community, but he still stands out as different, as uncanny, because of his experience, because he is a man who has, in many respects, died and come back from the dead, metaphorically. And of course, the departure of the mariner is described in terms of what he sees as he departs. He sees, of course, the church. He sees the lighthouse. He sees all of the village. He sees all of these representations of community, of human fellowship. The mariner understands that at the beginning of the poem, or at the beginning of his voyage, so to speak. What he doesn't understand, though, is that his community is much broader than simply human community. That he lives in a community, in a unity with all things. And this is where he is going to get into trouble in the course of his voyage. And of course, his departure means that he is parting. He is a part. And in order for him to be a true part, he has to be part of something. He has to be part of a unity. However, he doesn't understand that. And he sees everything, including himself, by the time he gets out onto the sea, as simply, excuse me, parts, separate individual parts, but not part of anything. So, again, think about if you play with Legos, or if you've ever built put together a puzzle. These things all have parts, but until they're unified into a whole, they're just a bunch of random scattered pieces. And for the mariner, as we'll see, he lacks the imagination necessary to perceive all things as vital. Okay, to go back to the definition, and all things as part of this unity. One of the curious moments in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, perhaps the most curious moment, is the killing of the albatross. And I'd like to address that for a moment from a more humane perspective, or at least from a perspective of what's called interpretive cruxes. A crux is the term that literary critics use to describe a problem that really cannot be resolved, no matter how hard you try to apply an interpretation. And I think the motivation behind the mariner killing the albatross is one of these cruxes. Obviously, it's the most important moment in the entire poem. Without the killing of the albatross, nothing else happens. There's no poem whatsoever. So it is an essential act for the narrative of the poem. But if we're looking at the character, we always are concerned about what motivates. Why does the mariner kill the albatross? That's a very good question. There are many reasons why he shouldn't kill the albatross. For example, the albatross apparently brings the ship and the crew luck. He becomes kind of a pet. They feed him. He hangs around. He is an animal for whom the crew has fondness. Even the mariner has fondness. And yet the mariner kills him. From a general literary critical point of view, and coming across something like this in a work of literature, there are two ways you could approach it. One is to say to yourself, well, it's just bad writing. Coleridge needed to have the albatross killed, and he couldn't come up with a good motivation, or he didn't want to take the time, so he just had the event occur. And there are There are plenty of works in which things like this happen. Bad movies are full of actions that don't seem to have any motivation behind them, and we tend to be very critical of them. That, or we come to realize that the motivation behind the action is irrelevant because what the story we're being told and what we're being asked to respond to is the series of events and not so much the psychology of the characters. There are many fine movies where you're not really asked to engage in the psychology of the characters, and you really shouldn't engage in the psychology of the characters because it'll ruin the fun. The other approach you can take is to assume that I'll say in this case right here that there must be a hidden reason for it. And I do believe I have a hidden reason for it. But before I give that to you, I'd like to say one more possible interpretation. We want to find out why it is the mariner kills the albatross. Maybe one reason is because people just do brutal things. We don't always have a reason for the terrible things that we do. Sometimes we just like being mean. Perhaps the mariner was bored and wanted to do something to change to kind of shake things up, and he decided to kill the albatross. And I speak for myself, but I also think I speak for everybody, we often engage in these kinds, I shouldn't say often, but we've done brutal things, needlessly killed a creature, kicked a sibling, not because we had any good reason to, but because we just felt like it. However, I think what's important here is that the mariner, and this is what will happen when we get to the atonement section, is that the mariner lacks imagination. He is able to kill the albatross because the albatross is just an object, as we saw in Coleridge's definition, and that as an object it is simply fixed and dead. He can't see any relationship between himself and the albatross, or the albatross and anything else. And that's what the imagination does. It puts things into a unity, and that's what the mariner lacks. Having killed the albatross, he and the entire crew are actually punished. The wonderful scene here that haunted me when I first read this poem when I was a freshman in high school is the dice game between death and life and death. And life and death wins the mariner's soul. And that's what he experiences. He experiences life and death, and the way Coleridge presents it, since he said already, objects as objects outside of the organizational capacity of the imagination, objects as objects are dead. Well, that's the way the mariner sees things, and so that's the fate that comes to him. That's his punishment. He will become an object. He will become fixed. The ship does not move. He is stranded by himself. There's not another living thing around, or apparently almost not another living thing around. There is something, and that's going to be his salvation. But he has to, of course, experience total and complete isolation. And that, again, according to Coleridge's definition, that is what a dead object is, something that has no relationship with anything else. And the mariner has killed his relationship with creation by killing an innocent member of creation because he can't recognize his relationship with it. So how does the mariner save himself? Well, part 4 is the key here. He's reached his most abject despair, right? The famous stanza that begins with line 232, alone, alone, all alone, alone on a wide, wide sea, and never a saint took pity on my soul in agony. And he sees the dead as beautiful, right? The many men so beautiful, and they all dead did lie, and 1,000,000 slimy things lived on, and so did I. So the dead are beautiful, and the living are slimy. The sea itself is rotting, right? The whole idea is that the deck is rotting. The whole idea is here that life and death, if it's life and death, then everything is in a state of decomposition. It's in a state of rot. It is outside of life. It has removed itself from that totality, that unity that the mariner fails to recognize because he does not have a competent imagination. But what's interesting too is that he says 1,000,000 slimy things lived on, and so did I. So he is equating himself with 1,000,000 slimy things. What are these 1,000,000 slimy things? Well, he comes back to it later, several stanzas later, when he starts talking about the water snakes. And at this point, though, having been isolated for as long as he has, he sees the only living things around, these slimy water snakes. But he sees them glowing, right? They're shining white. They have an elfish light. The hoary flakes are white flakes. That's what hoary means, an archaic term for white. And he says around line 282, "O happy living things, no tongue their beauty might declare." Now notice, just 10 stanzas ago he was saying these things were slimy, and he was equating them with himself in a sense of disgust. Now he's declaring them beautiful. And he says, "A spring of love gushed from my heart, and I blessed them unaware. Sure my kind saint took pity on me, and I blessed them unaware. That self-same moment I could pray, and from my neck so free the albatross fell off, and sank like lead into the sea." What has happened here? Well, he's able to recognize something that is far from human, just like the albatross. It's a creature. It's an animal, but suddenly he recognizes them as happy, as living. He recognizes their portion, their part in creation. And the blessing is an act of atonement. It's an act of recognition. And I used a little bit of a funny thing here with at one man, but that's what the mariner recognizes. That in fact he is one with these things as part of the overall creation. So finally, the mariner's imagination, which lacking caused him to kill an innocent creature, now causes him to bless and to love a set of innocent creatures. And by doing that, we see that his imagination has awakened. He's able to perceive the unity of all things. He's able to recognize the oneness of all things. And he himself now is prepared to be reunited and to be reintegrated into all things. So, of course, I'm not going to get into the longish section where you have the various the two spirits speaking to each other, the two voices. I'm less interested in that. For me, that is a section of the story that I think is a little bit weak, but that's just my own personal taste. It really has nothing to do with anything. What transpires after that, of course, is that the crew winds up being animated. There are dead bodies, at least, animated, and they begin to sail the ship back towards home, back towards where we started. So we have the beginning of a return, and the mariner is rescued um, by the pilot and his son. And of course, the son sees the mariner for what he is, a kind of pariah. And I'm not going to get into the full meanings of that word pariah, but he is pariah, which means he is somewhat of an outcast, and yet also has a special place within the community. But what the mariner wants to do is to go and shrive his soul, or to shrieve his soul, the archaic version here, to confess his sins, so that he can be welcomed back into the full into full fellowship with the community. The hermit himself is a representative being. He's a hermit. He lives out in the woods. He lives out in nature. So Coleridge is doing something clever here. He is also a religious figure. So he is something like a priest. That's the best way I can put it, since what's going on here is like confession. So he goes to a member of the religious community, who is also, by virtue of being a member of the religious community, or a member of the social community in general, but also as a hermit, as a person who lives in nature. He is also a representative of the natural community as well. And it is to this representative that the mariner confesses and receives absolution, and he undergoes a reunion. He returns to the union of all of these communities, the spiritual, the human, and the natural. And his sins against all of them, due to his lack of or failure of imagination, are forgiven. But again, as with, if any of you are Catholic, you know that forgiveness only is given, or only works, if there is genuine repentance, right? Genuine sorrow and regret, but simultaneously penance. Okay, so we have the reunion, and then he is reintegrated into society, into these three societies, these three communities, if you will. And in integration at its heart means the part returning to the whole. Right? There can be no whole, as we've talked about earlier, without parts, but there can be no part of something without there being a whole. So he is reintegrated. He becomes another. He returns to being a part of the whole, which is the function of the imagination. But he also has to do penance, and the penance is what we'll talk about in the last slide. The ending of The Ancient Mariner is curious. It seems to be fairly straightforward. It seems to wrap everything up nicely. Let me complicate a few things for you, though, because I don't think it does. But let us at least discuss what we discover, which is that the mariner, as his penance for what he has done to the albatross, and by extension to all of creation, and of course to the Creator, to God, by separating himself from the creative act of the I Am, by failing to employ his imagination so that he can actively participate in that creative act. Of course, he creates a separation between himself and God, as we talked about, spiritual community, the human community, and also the natural community. Well, as we find these things out, that's very fun. But there are two things that I find interesting, and a number of critics have as well. Some have used it, in fact, to be critical of the poem. I don't think you should be critical. I think it just opens up possibilities. I am not... When I read the very end of the poem, right, I'm struck by two things. One, the mariner says, I pass like night from land to land, I have strange power of speech. That moment that his face I see, I know the man that must hear me, to him my tale I teach. So, the mariner only tells his tale to someone that he recognizes through supernatural powers, right? Strange powers, that must hear him. And he says, to him my tale I teach. Well, why teach? Well, because apparently the tale is supposed to have some edifying power, some power of some educational power for the person who hears the story. So, the question then is, why the wedding guest? What makes the wedding guest someone who needs to be taught this story? Especially if we read the story the way we have been reading. Okay, what is the problem with the wedding guest? Now, there's of course the very, very famous fourth and third to last stanzas in the poem about he prayeth best who loveth best all things, both great and small, for the dear God who loveth us he made and loveth all. I've always felt that to be, while powerful and sweet, not completely convincing. Okay. It feels almost as though Coleridge is tacking on a kind of moralistic end to something that is a bit stranger than maybe even he realized. But the other thing that I'm curious about is this the wedding guest who leaves, right? He never attends the wedding, and then he says, it says here, he went like one that hath been stunned and is of sense forlorn. He has lost his sense. A sadder and a wiser man, he rose the morrow morn. This, of course, is in many respects one of the questions I've posed for the form. Why is, I can understand why he might be wiser, having heard this story, if in fact what the mariner has to tell him about, love everything because God loves us all. I can understand that could be a lesson that would impart wisdom to the wedding guest. My question is, why is he sadder? What about the story, which has a happy ending after all, makes the mariner sad? It seems to invalidate everything that's come before, or if not invalidate, to very much call it into question. I don't really have an answer. It's something that, if you're going to treat this poem well, you need to address. This is a poem that I have a lot of fun teaching in a face-to-face class, because it's great to ask questions and to explore the facets of the poem together. It feels to me, this is the first time I've done it in an online class, a little bit ham-fisted to try to tease these out, to put forth an interpretation without getting any kind of feedback from y'all, from my class. It seems almost counterproductive. Here it is, a poem that I'm saying has to do with acknowledging relationships among all things as a function of the imagination, which is a divine element in the human being and makes the human co-participant in God's creation. And yet to be alone, all alone when I'm talking about this. So I do apologize if I have rambled or seemed a little bit unsure, but I hope that at least having had this this presentation, I hope there have been some things I've given you that you can chew on, and I don't know if they taste good, but I hope they provide some nutritional value.